Now, we will learn clearly in section 76 of the Doctrine and Covenants that outer darkness, technically, officially, is reserved for the selectest few. The type that Alma was referring to back in chapter 39 about denying the Holy Ghost and knowing that they deny it. Whereas there are kingdoms of glory for everyone but them. Some the glory of the stars, some the glory of the moon, some the glory of the sun. We don't see that doctrine in the Book of Mormon. And I'm okay with that. Alma himself is admitting there are things I don't know, and I'm inquiring diligently of the Lord to find out some details. He's given me some. Other things I still don't know. Degrees of glory was a line and precept that came to Joseph Smith in an incredible flood of light. I'm so grateful we live with that understanding. But again, there were even things that Joseph didn't understand in section 76. Things that he learned later in section 88 and later in 93. Or that his nephew, Joseph S. Smith, learned later in 1918. As President Nelson has said repeatedly of late, the restoration is ongoing, and that's an exciting thing. So on the one hand, people would say, well, they didn't understand the degrees of glory yet, and so no wonder the Book of Mormon comes across with more of a stark heaven-hell kind of dichotomy. But that's not entirely the case. Admittedly, they don't yet know about degrees of glory. But as we'll soon see, Alma is finding out this isn't final judgment. That happens with resurrection, but there is a space that opens between death and the resurrection with some kind of preliminary judgment that precedes the final judgment. He's really trying to wrap his brain around this. It's fascinating to watch this unfold in these chapters. So he's trying to make sense of the spirit world. It's not just die, judged, heaven and hell. That's the mentality for most of Christian history. But that's not Alma's understanding. Judgment and separation in a final way happen at that moment of resurrection. But since there's space between death and the resurrection, what happens during that space? That's what he's grappling with. And here we start to see the separation of paradise and prison, not the separation of celestial, terrestrial, telestial, and outer darkness. So I don't think verse 13 is trying to pass final judgment saying, these are going to outer darkness. Because frankly, that won't be the case. I think more accurately, if we're sticking to verse 13, is that this is the mentality of those in spirit prison. They have no hope. They haven't learned the truth that would make them free. And so what's their assumption? I've chosen evil works instead of good. The spirit of the devil entered into me. He's got possession of my house. So what am I doomed for the rest of eternity? Outer darkness. No wonder there's weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Oh, there's a lot more hope for them than even they realize. President Smith will help us understand that. Joseph Smith will help us understand that with Work for the Dead. But to think that this is it. I've often been fascinated by other churches' plans of salvation. They don't call them that. But kind of this belief in the afterlife and judgment and so on. And for the most part, it's you live your life, you die, and that judgment is passed immediately, and you go to heaven or you go to hell. That's it. And the irony there, I've done this with classes sometimes where I'll draw out the normal rendition of the plan of salvation. I'm not much of an artist, but I can do circles and squiggly lines and arrows, right? And so you've got premortality, you pass through the veil, you come to earth, and then we die, and what happens? Oh, we go to the spirit world where it has paradise and prison. Then what? Then there's final judgment and resurrection, and we go to a kingdom of glory. Celestial, terrestrial, telestial, and the sparsely populated outer darkness. And we look at that for a moment, and then what's interesting is to ask them, what do other churches believe? And they look at that and go, oh, they don't believe any of that. I said, well, actually, let me just cover up the first part, since they don't believe in premortality, and let me cover up the last part, since they don't believe in the degrees of glory. But what do you have left? Earth life, death, some kind of judgment to separate them into paradise and prison. Well, what does that contracted view of the plan of salvation kind of look like? Earth life, death and judgment, heaven and hell. Wow. They're kind of right. They're just missing the ends, start and finish. So they would think that that was it. Final judgment has been passed, when it's, no, that's just preliminary. And you've kind of judged yourselves. Those who know the truth are in a state of rest and peace, free from troubles and cares and sorrows, because they know that the promise of resurrection and redemption is real. Weeping, wailing, gnashing of teeth is because they think this is it. They think this is outer darkness. Oh, it's not. There is yet a kingdom of glory waiting for almost all of them. I think we get a sense of that in verse 14. Now this is the state of the souls of the wicked, yea, in darkness, what they would consider outer darkness, but not the kind of capital O, capital D, registered trademark outer darkness that we associate with final judgment for sons of perdition. They are in darkness, in a state of awful, fearful looking for the fiery indignation of the wrath of God upon them. And they remain in this state, just like the righteous remain in their state of paradise, until the time of their resurrection. Now that's fascinating to me. An awful, fearful looking for the fiery indignation of the wrath of God. Remember what Alma said back in chapter 33, quoting Zenos and Zenock? That the only thing that makes God angry is us not understanding his mercies? Well, these are those who had no part nor portion in the Spirit of the Lord, which would have reassured them throughout life that God's forgiveness and love and mercy and long-suffering are real. What would they have been left with? This fearful conception of an angry God. And if that's the God that you've been taught to fear, then what's the spirit work going to look like to you? Imagine two youths, Corianton's one of them, sitting in chairs outside the bishop's office. They're both going in for interviews. One of them knows the bishop for what he's really like. A kind and loving leader who empathizes, understands their struggles, what they deal with, just wants to help, wants to turn his priesthood keys in their behalf. His friend sitting next to him does not have that impression of the bishop. He thinks of the bishop as some kind of angry disciplinarian, the executioner in there, sharpening the blade of the guillotine. And there they are, both sitting, waiting for the executive secretary to usher them in. How does youth number one feel as he's sitting there? This is just that space of time to wait. But his is a mental state of peace and rest, happiness. I get to go talk to the bishop. He's my friend. He's here to help me. And how's the second youth feel? Dreading the impending doom he's anticipating. Awful, fearful, looking. I love that word. It's like they're looking for something. And they're looking for something that will never really come. We condemn ourselves. I think the worst thing about scary movies is the anticipation. You know there's going to be a jump scare sometime. You just want it to happen. But you're always on the lookout. And that feeling of fear is what is devastating. Well, that's what they're feeling in spirit prison. That's their state of mind. They don't know the truth that would have set them free. Which is why when Christ dies and goes to the spirit world himself, he organizes the forces of the righteous to go and share that redeeming, comforting, reassuring message to everyone. That preliminary division was self-imposed. States of mind. There is yet a final judgment and degrees of glory that you've been preparing for and are yet preparing for. So there's those two states of mind. And at the end of verse 14, they remain in those states until the time of their resurrection.